Hi guys, let's tune in. I am so excited for today's discussion. Let's get straight into it. This is our first conversation when it comes to emotions. And particularly for this video, we will be talking about emotions and thoughts. The point of this conversation is to prove that emotions and thoughts are somehow connected. Then we'll get into some more juicy details. Let's go. What we'll do first is go through the list of definitions of emotions, and I'm only going to highlight the portion of the definition that proves thoughts are connected to our emotions. Psychological definition of emotions tells us that emotions are a complex mental state involving feelings, thoughts, etc. Emotions are tied to our mental state and our thoughts. We have our cognitive definition, an interpretation or evaluation of a situation that produces a feeling. The way that you think about whatever has happened about a situation, the way that you interpret it with your mind and evaluate it with your mind is going to determine how you feel about it. We have our behavioral definition, which tells us that emotions are observable expressions like facial expressions, actions, and body language. Now, how do we observe? We can argue that we use our senses to be able to observe something, but turning that observation from something we sensed into actual meaning, like our cognitive definition, interpreting it and evaluating it still has to do with the mind. Now we have our philosophical definition of emotion, which tells us that emotions are a subjective, conscious experience tied to meaning, values, and personal reflection. If you recall the subconscious mind that we are all going back and working with, please go watch that video. Meaning, values, personal reflection, the self-image and what we believe about ourselves is tied to the subconscious. Our values, somewhat like our beliefs, are tied to the subconscious mind. We're already working with the mind in terms of but subjective. I don't know why I researched this word. There's times where, just like we need to go back to the subconscious brain and make sure we know what we believe and all, we need to go back and sometimes research a word because we think we know and it's like subjective refers to anything based on, influenced by, or reflecting personal feelings, tastes, opinions, or biases. Rather than relying on hard facts, measurable data, or external reality, a subjective perspective originates entirely within the mind of an individual observer. I'm going to feel this way about this experience because this is tied to this certain belief, whatever. Moving on. Now we have our social definition of emotions, which tells us that emotions are a way of communicating and connecting with others through shared signals. Now, communication. We usually communicate what we're thinking. Hopefully we are thinking before we speak, but that's not going to be a lesson, but that's a different story. We've gathered all of these definitions that prove emotions have a mental component to them. We're going to talk about two more things. Number one, I want you to ask yourself this question. If I'm having happy thoughts, am I usually having happy emotions along with that thought? And if I'm having negative thoughts, I'm usually having negative emotions tied to that thought. And the entire point of bringing this up, if you are somebody that struggles with negative emotions, negative feelings, one way to protect yourself is to work on your mind. If my mental state is connected to my emotional state, and now I'm becoming aware of my thoughts and choosing my thoughts, taking in new data, my emotional state should follow that new thought that I'm having and the thoughts that I choose. In other words, you can gatekeep your emotional state by constantly having positive thoughts. And don't get me wrong, I'm not telling you to always be happy. You can have curious thoughts and analytical thoughts, right? But do you see the fact that we can protect our emotional state through our thoughts? And we'll get even deeper into this when we go into other videos. At the end of the day, there are so many people out here struggling with depression and anxiety. We are usually trying to fix this with our minds. And in a way we can by focusing on something that is positive. But there's a deeper layer to this, and that's coming in a future video because emotions are not just tied to the mental state, but to something else as well. Now, You can use your mind and your thoughts to control your emotions. And remember what affects your thoughts, what is in your database, the people we hang out with, our past experiences, the media, our experiences, the knowledge that we take in. All of this is affecting our thoughts, which is going to have a consequence of affecting our emotional state. We're going to receive a greater impact from changing our thoughts. Happy emotions, negative thoughts, negative emotions. You with me? Here's where I nerded out just a little bit more. So we've been talking a bit about AI and the fact that not only is AI recognizing our patterns, modeling many of the human mind's abilities within the functions itself, and our brain works like AI, only being able to have thoughts related to our database, our experiences. Now, I had a thought. Who'da thunk? If AI is learning from us, well, why can't we use AI to learn about ourselves? I mentioned the portion of embeddings. This is one of the ways that AI is learning and reflecting back our own state back to us. If I use the term ugly, it's going to use all of the different synonyms of ugly tied to me. And even though AI doesn't have emotions, emotions have a mental component, and AI is excellent at logic and information processing. So part of emotions related to the brain is when we can ask AI for help. Okay, this is the prompt I asked AI. And mind you, I already talked about using a private browser when it comes to chat because I want to make sure that it isn't gathering all of this data on you. But shit happens. Not to mention that the chat that I'm specifically going to talk to you about today that has my data is really related to my work because I don't want to have to remind AI all of the things that I've worked on. You with me? But what do I do for work? I think about thoughts. I think about emotions. I am creating an app that helps you to get into your subconscious brain. When I'm giving you this feedback that AI is giving about me, it's specifically in relation to my work because my one-off chats about research that I'm interested in, it's usually in a chat that will disappear and I'll never hear about again. To each his own. So this was my chat. I want you to tell me what you've inferred about my personality, emotions, and thoughts. Bruh. According to chat, I am introspective, meaning-oriented, pattern recognition-driven, emotionally perspective, creative, systematic thinker, independent-minded. There's all these different categories. It gave me my core personality, thinking style, emotional nature, primary motivations, core internal questions, strengths, communication style, spiritual orientation. You get the point. But we're talking about emotions. Stay focused. So I said, tell me more specifically about my emotions. What words and prompts did I use that made you reach the conclusion? It's a little bit hard to share all of this information because it's about me. Chad has reached the conclusion that I have a desire for emotional truth and authenticity. Tuning forks, unite. Okay, this was one chat, but we have several different emails, right? Like I try to keep something for my work in one chat and maybe more if it's a bit of the same thing, but I did this in several different chats, and here's some other data from a different chat about me according to AI.
Searching for identity beneath conditioning.
True. The point is, we're moving on. This is not about me. If you are somebody that is logged into AI, you can start asking questions about yourself in this context, specifically about your emotions, because that's this video. And remember, emotions have a mental component. This can infer a lot of information. It's probably going to be pretty spot on because even though we're going to talk about the other components of emotions, it's all interconnected. Again, it's not going to tell you everything. It's intellectualizing emotions. And how many times do you feel something that you don't have words for? Okay. The last thing that I just want to say, maybe recommendation I have for a prompt is, what are your recommendations for me? Here are your recommendations tailored to the patterns I've observed about how you think, process emotion, and relate to healing. I'll keep it grounded and practical, not abstract. Okay, Chad. Here are some things that it told me. Nervous system first, not understanding. I'm arguably more analytical than I am emotional, but I analyze my feelings before I actually feel them. So chat is telling me that I should feel before I analyze, all up in my business. The next thing that it recommended for me, reduce over intellectualizing loops. I wouldn't be able to tell you all of this. You don't have to take all of the information, the entire reason why I was looping back. Sure, right? Because it's hard to get out of a loop to begin with. But if I'm trying to help you understand your thoughts and your emotions, I had no choice but to go back and say, what about this? What about that? Because it's not just about my emotions and thoughts anymore. It's about yours. And I'm trying to help you. You'll see on the app. Anyway,
spiritual idea does not connect to the body relation.
Good recommendation. I see you. But do you understand? The entire point of this lesson was telling us that emotions have a mental component to them. We saw in our definitions. Now we understand that if we are focused on changing our brain, whatever we think about, we can infer that our emotional state is probably going to match those thoughts. We'll talk about when they don't match up in a different video. Then we also introduced AI and the fact that AI is actually learning from us and built off of a lot of the human brain's capabilities. It is studying us. And now we can use AI to study ourselves. And not just study ourselves, but to study AI. We can start asking it questions. What are you inferring about me? So if you're not the best or getting started with self-reflection in itself, start asking AI what it is inferring about your personality, about your thoughts, about your emotions, and it will help you to start self-reflecting. And remember, it's not always going to be right. You have to pick and choose the parts that it is correct about, reflect on it, and it'll start to give you insight so you don't have to do all of the work on your own. Now, I hope you enjoyed this first discussion within our emotional discussions, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.